All right. Thank you guys for joining us today. This is the Mexico Q&A roundtable staff meeting of all the Overland Expo folks with extensive Mexico travel experience. And so why don't we go, extensive. Let's go around the circle and introduce ourselves and what's your forte in Mexico. Start with Azure.
Hey guys, I'm Azure O'Neill. I'm Overland Expo's Director of Logistics, and I traveled by motorcycle down the Baja Peninsula and then crossed over by ferry from La Paz to the mainland, and then kind of wound my way through around the mainland and crossed over into Guatemala from there.
Very cool.
I'll go next. I'm Eva. I'm the Motorcycle Community Ambassador for Overland Expo, and just before the border closed from the United States, I had returned from a trip in Baja, but I've also traveled fairly extensively in mainland Mexico, mostly vagabonding around with my dogs and climbing lots of rocks.
And I'm Anthony Skoll. I'm the Sales Director for Overland Expo, and I have experience in mainland Mexico and the Baja Peninsula, most recently back in December, right before all this started happening. So, yeah.
All right, I'm Allison Zapp. I am Director of Operations for Overland Expo, and my route is very similar to Azure's. We're going down the Baja Peninsula, crossing over to mainland, and then continuing south into Guatemala.
Very cool. We are the Okie Nomads, Zach and Rachel Ellsman, and we most recently did our first trip to Baja in 2019 and spent 4 months house sitting and bouncing around in our little Toyota 4x4. And so we are the newbies to the Mexico travel group. Let's get it started with the number one question I think everybody gets about traveling in Baja, and that's safety. How safe is it to travel? Is it safe for families? Any issues with the cartels or other crime? And I'll throw this one to Azure first on what has your experience been with safety in Mexico?
My experiences with safety in Mexico have largely been extremely positive. Definitely went kind of through every day being very cognizant of just my surroundings and ensuring I wasn't doing anything to unnecessarily put myself in a risky situation. But I do that anywhere I'm traveling, whether it's the US, Australia, Venezuela. It's kind of the same process for me. I spent a lot of time talking to the locals. I feel like, most people want you to have a really positive experience in their country and are proud of their country. So they'll guide you, where to go to kind of stay out of the way of risk or harm. That's been my overall experience. It was very positive.
Very cool. Does anybody have any horror stories from Mexico?
You hear them all the time, but I've really never had a bad experience in Mexico, knock on wood. Everyone's just always been so helpful and so happy to see you, and just so happy that you're coming to their camp or to their restaurant. And yeah, I've never had anything but good luck in Mexico. So
yeah, I would say for us as well, our 4 months it felt safer than some parts of San Diego.
And I'll add to that too. When I went down there, we kind of followed more travelers who had been before us advice about which roads to go on, which roads to avoid, and just kind of followed those rules and did not follow, mass media at all, because then you just get way too many horror stories that aren't going to scare you away more than actually encourage you to go. But usually the followers or the travelers before you can kind of help guide where to go and where to stay for recent events.
Definitely. Yeah, just kind of a spoiler alert for anybody watching. The U.S. Embassy has a constant travel warning for the level 2 restriction for Baja all the time, regardless of what's happening in the country or what the situation is at the border. It's kind of a running. They also have the same one for Germany. So keep that in mind. It's a fairly safe place to travel as well. So that's something we found pretty interesting when we crossed over, and they're like, well, there's travel restrictions there. Well, yes, there are travel restrictions to a lot of places. So Anthony, I kind of the visa situation and like insurance and what do you need? Like, does your driver's license work down there? Like all those questions that you don't really think about. Can you shine some light on the situation as far as documentation goes?
Yeah, maybe a little bit, and everyone else feel free to jump in too. But I do know that if you're from the U.S. or Canada and you want to visit Mexico as a tourist, or even as like on business or as a journalist or for studies or even just passing through for a period of exceeding, I think it's 180 days, you don't require a tourist visa. So you don't have to get a visa if you're not exceeding 180 days in Mexico. The things that you do have to have, like you have to have a passport or a passport card, but you can't fly into Mexico with a passport card. But you can drive into Mexico with a passport card. And another thing that you need to think about when you're crossing the border, you need to have insurance, and U.S. insurance doesn't work in Mexico at all. And it's not valid, and most collision and comprehensive insurance isn't valid in Mexico either. So the U.S. State Department recommends that you purchase a full coverage insurance policy that'll cover the cost of bail in the event that you have like an at-fault accident in Mexico. Everything is different there. So like, you could run into somebody could run into you and they could say that you're at fault. And you just want to just make sure that you get really good insurance. I mean, it's super simple. You can buy it online before you even cross the border, and it's just it's good to have. And then if you're the other thing that you need to do when you're crossing the border is make sure that you have a temporary vehicle import permit, and that's critical, especially if you're crossing into Baja and then driving down to La Paz to get on a ferry to go over to mainland. Because they don't sell the temporary import permit down in the southern part of Mexico at all, or southern part of Baja at all. So I've heard stories of people who crossed the border in Baja California Norte, drove all the way down the length of Baja, which is no small feat. It's like it takes a while to get down to the bottom. And then they were going to travel over to mainland and couldn't. They had to actually like fly back to go buy a temporary vehicle permit, and then fly back down to Baja, to the southern part of Baja, to like get back on a ferry. So get your temporary import permit. It's super cheap. It's like $50, something like that. And then you have to put a deposit down, which you get back. You just have to take it to a Benercito.
To add a little quick piece to that, because on our last Baja trip, we rode across the border here. I live in Bisbee, Arizona, so we're right on the border. We crossed at Naco and we stayed entirely in the green zones, like the Mexico Libre zones. So Sonora and Baja all fall into that category. And so it was a nice little workaround. We took the ferry across from San Carlos to Santa Rosalita, which it's a little bit slower of a ferry. You have to time it a little bit better than you would in and out of La Paz. But if you're just doing a quick trip and you want to, we were down there for a couple of weeks between our mainland time and our Baja time. And so it was a nice sort of quick workaround and one less step to just getting us launched down into Baja.
With that being said, one of the questions that we got on social was, is there a time to avoid, or what time of year do you recommend going down and visiting? Allison, I'll let you go on this one.
I can only kind of speak from experience of when I went down there. I believe it was end of October, kind of into November, and it was gorgeous. Like it wasn't too hot. It was sunny most of the days, so it was just a really pleasant time of year. So probably going into the more winter months would be ideal. Anybody else has other experience about times of year?
Yeah, I mean, we crossed, January 5th, I think, is whenever we crossed, and didn't get back until April. And it was awesome. We were house sitting for a little while up in the northern part of the peninsula. It snowed on us. We got 8 inches of snow up at elevation. So it's you have your risks there in the higher elevations, but most of Baja that you're going to want to go explore. It was warm, pleasant.
Well, and all the flowers were starting to bloom as we were leaving. And so the cactus and the like kind of deserty stuff, we're all starting to get those really pretty pinks and yellows. So end of April timeframe. And the hummingbirds were out. So we got to see thousands of hummingbirds, which was really fun.
Summer's super hot, but it's doable. And as long as you're near the Sea of Cortez or the Pacific side, where you can jump in the water, I think you're good to go. But it is hot. Be prepared.
Yeah, those of us without air conditioning and the motorcyclist, I imagine, aren't going to be making a July run anytime soon.
Nope.
One of the questions that we got and that we got all the time talking about Baja is, do you need to know Spanish? Do you need to have foreign language experience? The fluent Spanish speakers on the panel?
Nope, I took Spanish in high school, and I thought, 10 years later that it would come back to me, and it didn't. So my experience, in Mexico was very minimal with Spanish. But if you know at least a few words so that it shows that you're trying, people are very helpful. A lot of pantomiming goes on and trying to explain what you're looking for or what they're suggesting. And so as long as you're just patient and can, be kind to the locals who are trying to help you, I think you can get by without knowing a lot of Spanish.
I took 4 years of Spanish in high school and college, and I'm still surprised how much I don't know. So, it's like I can have a pretty rudimentary conversation with somebody down there, but you're not getting deep at all.
I think we used Google Translate on a daily basis and just started like handing our phones across occasionally, because we would try to type something in and say it, and they'd be like, I know. And so I'd just show them the phone and be like, oh yeah, okay. Like, thanks. I took 6 years of German, and so we would get up to the border crossings, and I couldn't tell you how many times like I would understand in Spanish what they were trying to ask us, and the first thing out of my mouth would be a German response, and Zach would just look at me and be like, that's not
and right. if you think that a federal at a checkpoint is confused by two gringos in a busted Toyota, imagine when one of them responds to him in German, and then you have to just like breathe a little bit. Let's try it in broken Spanish and see where we get.
Yeah.
What about you, Azure? I know you're fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, right?
Yeah. No. My Spanish was pretty good though, but I was traveling with Rule, and he spoke like 6 other languages, and I feel like was determined not to learn Spanish for the first few months we were in Central America. But it was really interesting because in Mexico, it was very apparent how much more I was getting out of the experience of interacting with locals. And it was also a lot more exhausting because he was totally relying on me. But if we'd be like invited to someone's home for dinner, I would have a grand old time because I would understand all of the family jokes and be able to engage, to some extent. And he would be sitting like a bump on the log and quite bored. So.
Does anybody have a preferred border crossing? I know we crossed at Tecate, and it was really, really simple and kind of a chill region up there in the kind of the wine country, start of the wine country up north. Does anybody have like a preferred border crossing? And I'll go to Allison first on this one.
I don't know if it's preferred. I think it was actually said not to, but I crossed in Tijuana. But we got up super early, like at 6 a.m., and it was super easy. So we just got through probably within half an hour, and we're into Mexico and got an early start on the day.
I love the Tecate crossing. It's so easy and everything's right there. Like there's an ATM right there. The office is right there where you can, get everything that you need. And yeah, it's so much more chill than any other border crossing that I've ever been across.
So for crossing from the mainland, I was very often based in Texas and heading south from there. And I would always skip the Laredo crossing, head a little bit further west and cross at Columbia, which is a little tiny crossing. You can't necessarily do all of your vehicle import-export stuff there that you need to, but for just quick back and forth, once you already have your permitting, if you're crossing back and forth in and out of the US. So when I always think smaller is better, as long as you can handle all of your visa and vehicle import requirements.
Speaking of kind of going down the border and looking at different things, did anybody have like a preferred like map, guidebook, anything like that you think is invaluable for Baja crossing or Mexico in general?
I brought all my favorite Baja books to the panel discussion today. Do you guys know these books? They are beautiful and so fun. Baja 101. There's this great other little guidebook. It's by a company called See Me Press. It's an Italian publisher, and they have beautiful pictures and awesome little snippets, and it's all about Baja.
Nice.
Very cool. They have a bunch of different publications focusing on travel and culinary stuff, and they're just so cool, so fun.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll link in the description of the video. We'll link to all of the stuff mentioned and make sure everybody has access to those. What about you, Anthony? Any guidebooks, maps? What's your go-to?
Actually, Google works down there fairly well, and the maps are pretty damn good actually. But as a backup, I always have a GPS, and I have the latest Mexico maps on it.
What maps did you use?
We had the Nat Geo maps for the north and south part of Baja, and we enjoyed carrying these around. It was fun to kind of just look in as we were driving to see where we were headed. And then we also used iOverlander on our phone quite a bit, because it seemed like a lot of people were putting like, hey, try this camping spot, or this was a really good fish taco place. And so we used iOverlander the entire time we were down there.
And that leads me into kind of my next question on like equipment or tools that are invaluable in Baja. Rachel, what's your go-to tool for Mexico travel?
So I have a silly one and then a serious one. So when we were looking at this question, I was like, to be honest, the number one thing that I feel like we used in Mexico was my phone. And I hate that answer, but it had the maps, it had Google Translate, the data worked, and so we could still call home when we needed to. So honestly, my phone, but then whenever we actually sat down and thought about like vehicle, our air compressor. So just having the onboard air, the house that we were house sitting at was about 2 miles from pavement. And so it was so nice to be able to air the tires down. And then whenever we hit pavement again, air them back up. We drove on the beach a lot and could do the same thing. So I would say the air compressor for us was probably the number one thing that we used.
What about you, Anthony?
Yeah, I'll echo those two things too. I mean, I guess the other thing that I've always had are like max tracks and a shovel. And especially if you're driving on the beach at all, or if you're in silty sand in there, it's super important. Literally never used my winch in Baja, but I've always used max tracks and a shovel. So I definitely take those.
What about you, Azure? What's a go-to for motorcycle travel in Mexico?
I would like to say an air compressor, because like theoretically it would have been smart to air down our tires a lot more often than we did, but maybe we only did that once, and just kind of toughed it out the rest of the time. Even though I was there in like December through February, it was still pretty hot though. So I was thinking the one thing for motorcyclists that really I would recommend is some kind of cooling whatever. Like I usually wear a buff and I'll soak it, during pit stops, and then it helps with evaporative cooling for the hot days.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to that, where my trick was always a spray bottle full of like peppermint oil, diluted peppermint oil, because you spray that on whatever buff or base layer you have, and so the wind coming through kind of helps create air conditioning. So.
But I would say most importantly is bring whatever you need to sleep on the beach, because that is my favorite part, especially about being in Baja, is just being able to just haul straight down to the sand and throw down your bedroll and camp out. So
kind of leads into the next question was what modifications or what standard of minimum vehicle do you need to do Baja or Mexico? And I love this question because it's often overthought and overanalyzed. But so has that been everybody else's experience as far as a vehicle? Just get in your vehicle and make sure it's reliable and hit the road.
But I mean, drive what you have. I mean, Baja in particular has tons of freeways and paved streets, and you can get anywhere. I mean, it's not, it's not an issue. You can definitely drive down there with a 2-wheel drive vehicle. I just wouldn't go off road, and I wouldn't try to do anything weird.
Agreed. What about you, Allison? What do you think?
When we got to the ferry, which is kind of like a pinch point where you get to see a lot of other motorcyclists, like it was kind of ride what you have, and kind of same thing with what Anthony said. You know, if it's more suited to on-road, there's plenty of on-road exploring to do. So just kind of go with what you're comfortable with.
What about you, Azure? Same experience?
Same. When we were in Alaska, actually, we met a guy who was on, I think, 150cc motorcycle who had ridden all the way up from Argentina. And he'd done all of Mexico and Baja, and he had a great time. And literally had everything strapped on with bungee straps, but he'd done it, and you can take anything as long as you're confident in it.
What about you, Eva? Same thing? Run with your bro?
You know, that's my favorite thing about traveling, especially in Mexico, is it's one of the places where, for those of us in the United States, we can remember to turn the coffee pot off, close the garage, and ride right out the door straight to Mexico. There's no shipping of bikes, there's no renting, there's no flying. It's just like this really pure experience. And I think I love trips on little crusty motorcycles and in crusty old vehicles, because I just feel like it really speaks to the essence of adventure. And I feel like that is what Mexico is all about. Like, it's right there. It's so accessible. It's such a great first international trip, because they're our neighbors, you know? And I mean, I guess you could go to Canada too, but it's so cold up there. I don't know why anyone would do that.
Awesome. So last question, as we wrap this thing up. Do you have a recommendation for a must visit town, village, beach, location, attraction, anything like that? We'll start with Anthony. What's your go-to must visit locale in Mexico?
Generally, like, I love the Valle de Guadalupe. It's the wine region just outside of Ensenada, south of Tecate, north of Ensenada, and you know, when we were there in 2013, there were about 6 wineries there, and now there's like 40, and it's incredible. Like, I mean, seriously, you've got to go. It's a day trip from Southern California and San Diego. So, I mean, go and experience it, because it's super, super great. I love it there. We've camped in vineyards out there. You just throw a little bit of extra money to whoever's running the counter, and it was incredible. It was so much fun. In a couple of other places in Baja that I tend to gravitate to a little bit are like Bahia de los Angeles, which is about like midway down the peninsula on the Sea of Cortez side. There's a lot of camps just north of town that are really great. And then there's some dispersed camping out there as well. But you can fish right out there. You can sup. You can, you know, if you could rent a boat and take a boat out there. Bahia Concepcion's another spot that's down in Baja Sur. So those are great. And then in the mainland part, I mean, Cañón de Sumidero is a really amazing spot. You have to take a boat to go in, and there's like a park in the middle of it. It's crazy. It's really cool. And then in Michoacan, I totally recommend going and seeing it's La Biosfera Mariposa Monarca. And it's actually where all of the monarchs go for the winter. And literally there are millions of butterflies there. Like, it's insane. There's so many butterflies. It's totally worth going and checking out. I highly recommend that one.
Very cool. What about you, Azure? What's your go-to spot?
Like Anthony, I don't think it's possible to pick just one. I think it depends on what you're looking for in Mexico. I feel like it is one of those countries that really has it all. Top like nature, kind of different, would probably be Gilitla in Las Posas. It's a surrealist sculpture garden that's kind of been taken back over by nature, and it's super cool. Any cenotes that you're around, they're, you know, natural pools with waterfalls, usually a great place to catch a bath too if it's been a few days since you've had a shower. I loved Oaxaca for the architecture and the food. Had the best tacos al pastor in San Miguel de Allende. Could keep going on and on, but someone else chime in.
What do you think, Allison? Go-to place?
I'll second for Oaxaca. I loved Oaxaca. It was just an amazing place to go visit. I ended up there on Dia de los Muertos. And so being able to see the festivities and see kind of just like, this is what they do. And so it was just kind of a nice little kind of insight into their culture. And also, you know, seconding the food there and in Puebla was just amazing. And so for me, I didn't explore probably the nature as much. I ended up in cities a lot because you could get a really cheap hostel, and so kind of opted for places that had more like city centers that you could go around and walk at night and kind of check things out and check out the markets, check out the people, check out the architecture, and of course the food. The food in Mexico is just amazing all the way through.
All right, Eva, what do you think? Go-to place?
And I mean, you guys named so many good places. The colonial cities are obviously one of my favorite things, whether it's San Miguel Allende or Bariles or any of those like easy, close to the U.S. riding cities. I really loved spending time like south of Puerto Vallarta and some of the odd little offset beach towns further south from there. On our Baja trip, I fell in love with La Paz. Like, I want to move to La Paz. I could live there. It is such a great city. And then Baja Sur is just so great. Cabo Pulmo and all the great camping on the beaches and the great riding. And then, I mean, further north, like Bahia Concepcion and Mulegé and El Triunfo and so many, I mean, there's just so many wonderful places. And you could definitely just alternate your entire trip between riding motorcycles and eating and drinking. Like, that's all you have to do. Like, throw in like some sleeping on the beach and having some great conversations in your bad kitchen Spanish. And I mean, it's perfect. It's a perfect travel destination. I love it.
When are we going? Let's go.
Staff trip. I am down. Very cool. What was your go-to spot?
So I was thinking of two. We camped on the beach just north of Cabo, south of Todos Santos, on the Pacific side. And we got to see whales and seals, and the waves were some of the biggest I've ever seen. And I realized they're probably not just huge, but that campsite will probably live on as like one of the best places I've ever camped, because we opened up the rooftop tent and just could like watch it all from the tent. But then I really enjoyed La Paz as well. We've talked about just hightailing it to La Paz and spending the winter there really soon, because the town was so fun. We could just walk around. They had the boardwalk out front. You could go out of town just a little bit and have beaches all to yourself. And then we found tamales, which I know is not probably like the big thing for Baja, but I love pineapple tamales. And we found this little lady that would sell them for like 2 pesos, and they would be the size of like the biggest burrito you've ever seen. And one of my favorite things is pineapple tamales. So La Paz was a fun one for me.
But then my other one was up in Norte, the San Pedro de Martir National Park. It's the high point of Baja, and it's the National Observatory, and they've got California condors, and it's just a really unique, it reminds me of Flagstaff, you know, in the spirit of Overland Expo West. Pine forests, and you can just get lost up there forever. The trails, you can explore all kinds of backcountry stuff with very little regulation and oversight from the park there. But and they get snow. They get snow most of the winter. They'll have a foot of snow up there, so it's a really unique. You can see both sides from the top, and so you can look over and see the Pacific side over the mountains, and then you can look back toward the Sea of Cortez and see San Felipe down in the valley. And it's just a really, it's just kind of crazy when you get up there, and you can hike and all kinds of stuff. So a super cool place off the beaten path.
It's so unexpected. Like, like when you think of Baja, you don't think of mountains and pine trees and snow, but like it's such an unexpected spot. It's so cool. I agree.
Anything to add here at the end?
Just go.
Yeah,
Lock it up and go. Turn the coffee pot off, lock the front door, and just drive right out your driveway and go to Mexico.
I love it.
That's part of it.
That's great advice. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. And if everybody can give me a cheesy Zoom meeting wave to end this. Guys, thank you so much. Adios.